Okay, I have a feeling this video is going to be super long. After all, this was a 3-hour movie and I have to get through all of it. So hopefully it's interesting enough for you to stick with me. Okay, so this is my spoiler-filled discussion review of Avengers Endgame. So if you have autoplay on your YouTube channel and you ended up on this video by mistake, I'm giving you a warning. This is spoilers, 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 spoilers. So if you have not seen Avengers Endgame, I'm giving you time to click off this video. But before you bow out, please check out my non-spoiler review here on the channel. Alright, you've been warned. Here we go. So this movie opens in a way that I'm assuming a lot of us suspected, with Hawkeye training his daughter how to use the bow and arrow. And I saw this movie twice, and something that I didn't notice in the first viewing was they panned down and showed his ankle monitor from the fact that he's on house arrest from his actions in Civil War. And also with his daughter, I was just like, is his daughter going to take the place of Kate Bishop? Because Clint called her Hawkeye, but her name is actually Lila Barton. So I'm like, are they going to pull a situation where she's going to maybe change her name to Kate Bishop, or Kate Bishop is just not going to be a thing and it's just going to be Lila Barton as Hawkeye? Because there are rumors that Marvel Studios is going to do a Young Avengers movie. So I'm like, is this what you're teasing, Marvel? She's going to be the new Hawkeye? But for those of you that don't know, really quickly, Kate Bishop is a character that takes on the mantle of Hawkeye after the Avengers break up in the comics in the Avengers Disassembled run, and also Hawkeye is presumed dead in the comics. So as a way to honor him, she takes on his mantle, since she is a fan of the Avengers and she is good with a bow and arrow, and she eventually joins the team of the Young Avengers. So anyway, while they're training, Clint turns his back for just a second, and then he turns around and you see the dust effect that happened during Infinity War, and we as the audience knows that she's gone, but Clint doesn't know what's happening. And then he turns around and then he sees his wife, who's played by Linda Cardellini. She's gone. She, interesting enough, more than likely got snapped away and ended up in the Curse of La Llorona, and his 3 sons disappeared too. And the whole audience is just like, damn. So we then get the Marvel logo, and Dear Mr. Fantasy is playing by Traffic, and we see Tony Stark and Nebula on board the Benatar basically passing time playing finger football. And then you get to the part that was in the trailer where Tony Stark is leaving this heartbreaking message to Pepper Potts, basically saying they ran out of food, they ran out of water, they ran out of gas, and by tomorrow morning they're going to be running out of oxygen. And I was like, does Nebula need to eat and breathe? Like, had Tony Stark not been rescued, would Nebula still be alive, or would she die too? I'm not sure about that. But anyway, they are rescued by Captain Marvel. And at first, when I saw this movie, I was like, how did she just randomly find them in space like that? Like, that was convenient. And granted, it still might be a little convenient, but after seeing it for a second time, I was like, well, it kind of makes sense, because that is Rocket's ship. I'm pretty sure he has a tracker on that ship, and he hadn't heard from his crew members. He doesn't know if Quill, Drax, Mantis, he doesn't know if any of them disappeared during the snap. He doesn't know what happened to Gamora. So I'm pretty sure he sent Captain Marvel out to space, since she's really the only one that could go when she showed up looking for Nick Fury. I'm pretty sure he sent them out to space with probably a tracker or something, like, hey, go find them. And so she found the ship, she brought it back to Earth, and I think they did a really good job making Robert Downey Jr. look super frail. Like, you could almost see the bones on his face. His face looked super sunken as he was sitting on the ship, and when he got back to Earth, like, he looked weak. So good job to them. So Tony's back on Earth, he reunites with Pepper and the other Avengers, and they basically have a conversation of what do they do now. And they came up with a plan. Captain Marvel's like, you know what, we're gonna go and we're gonna take Thanos out, and basically the stuff that you see in the trailer. The difference between the fight that you had in Infinity War and now is that you have me. And so they go to the planet that Thanos is on, the farm planet, and so that's where you see the line again from the trailer where Captain America says, let's go get this son of a bitch. And I'm just like, language, Captain. And then you see the title card, Avengers Endgame. And this is really like only the first 20 minutes or so in this movie. So yes, for the most part, the Russos were not lying when they said most of the marketing for this movie is going to be the first 20 minutes of the movie. Of course, they showed some other parts of the movie, but the majority of the marketing has been the first 20 minutes of the movie. So I say bravo to the Russo brothers for that. So the Avengers take off into space, and so they end up on the farm planet that Thanos is on, and you see Thanos, and he's limping, and you eventually get to see when they do a close-up on his face that he has third-degree burn marks on the whole side of his face that the Infinity Gauntlet is on. And you're just sitting there like, damn, what happened to him? Because he wasn't like that during Infinity War. But before you can even really think about it, in comes crashing Captain Marvel, in comes the Hulkbuster with Mark Ruffalo's Thanos, Bruce Banner, War Machine comes in, all the Avengers come in, and they basically take out Thanos easily. And Thor comes in and chops off his arm, which he should have did, or Doctor Strange should have did in the first movie, but that's neither here nor there. And you're just like, wow, that was easy. But of course, you know, it's not going to be that easy because it's only like the first 20 so minutes of the movie. And so Rocket turns the gauntlet around and he sees the stones are gone. And they're like, where are the stones? And Thanos basically tells them that he used the Infinity Stones to destroy them. His work was done. The Infinity Stones are nothing but temptation. And then he also didn't want his work to be erased. So with destroying the stones, it almost killed him. And that's why he looked the way he did. And basically he just says, I am inevitable. Basically saying that the work is done. There's nothing that the Avengers can do to reverse this. And Thor, in a fit of rage, chops off his head. And the whole audience was like, oh shit! Because that's something that's super dark. It's something that we never really seen in the MCU movies up to this point. And it was something that I wasn't expecting at all. And neither were the Avengers. And when Rocket was like, what did you do? He basically fulfilled Thanos' request when he said, you should have went for the head. He went for the head, alright. And yeah, like I said, like I wasn't expecting that at all. Like Thanos is dead now already in the first half an hour, 20 so minutes of the movie. And I wasn't expecting Thanos to die so soon. I was hoping Thanos wouldn't die at all, but especially in the beginning of the movie, like my prediction was, I thought in the beginning of this movie they were going to go after Thanos and they were going to get their ass handed to them. And maybe most, if not all of the Avengers, except for maybe Stark, was going to die, thus fulfilling the dream that he had where he saw all of the Avengers laying on the ground dead. I thought that was basically going to happen in the beginning of this movie. And then Stark, he gets in the ship or whatever, maybe with Rocket or somebody else, they all escape and they go back to Earth. And then the rest of the movie happens. But nope, I was dead wrong. But I like this version better. So now we jump forward in time, 5 years later. Not 5 months later, not 5 weeks later, but 5 years later. They had to live with the fact that the Avengers lost. So then we pan to see Captain America at basically an AA type of meeting for the people trying to move on with their lives from what happened with the snap or the decimation. And we see a character played by Joe Russo, who's one of the directors, and he is basically telling the group about he went on his first date in 5 years, and interestingly enough, the date was with another guy. And the reason I say interestingly enough is because the character, although minor, that Joe Russo played is the first blatantly LGBTQ character within the Marvel Universe. But yeah, Tessa Thompson has come out and said that her character Valkyrie is bisexual, but it's never actually stated in the movies. It's implied in that one scene where you see the Valkyries fighting against Hela, but again, it's never stated. There was talk about Okoye and Ao from the Dora Milaje being in a homosexual relationship, but again, it was never said. Loki in the comics is bisexual, but in the movies, it was never said. In the comics, Korg is also gay, but again, in the movies, it was never said. So hopefully this moment opens the door where I'm like, especially considering that there's rumors of them doing Young Avengers, I'm like, yes, Marvel, give me Hulkling and Wiccan. I've been calling for them for ages now. Give me Northstar once you introduce the X-Men. Give me a bisexual Mystique and her relationship with Destiny. Give me America Chavez. Give me Iceman. There's also talks about them having Hercules be the main character in the Eternals movie. And they've implied one time that Hercules is bisexual in the comics. He had sex with Northstar. So yeah, give me a fully bisexual Hercules. And I could go on. But also another cool thing about that scene is Jim Starlin, who's the creator of Thanos and Darkseid and the one that created the entire Infinity Gauntlet storyline in the comics, made a cameo in this scene. So that's cool considering they pretty much owe the entire Infinity Saga within the MCU to him for this storyline. We then jump to San Francisco where they show us the true savior of the Marvel Universe, a rat. And it can't be a coincidence because the ruler of Disney World is Mickey Mouse. He's the king and he is a type of rodent. And it's a rat that basically gets Ant-Man out of the quantum realm. I see what you're doing there, Disney. So Ant-Man gets out the quantum realm. He's all confused because he doesn't know what's going on. And we learn later on that he's only been there for 5 hours, but 5 years have passed. And so he's walking around trying to figure out what's going on. And he rushes home to find his daughter, only to find out his daughter is all woman-sized now. And kudos to Paul Rudd because the acting on his face alone, just having him go from the different layers of emotion, from being confused to who this person is, to realizing it's his daughter, to realizing that he's missed 5 years of his daughter's life, and then him being all sad, and then him trying to put on a strong front for his daughter. Like, all of that was brilliant. So go Paul Rudd. Like, I think a lot of people sleep on the fact that, yes, he's a great comedic actor, but he's a great dramatic actor as well. And he's always been hot. I've always had a crush on Paul Rudd blood ever since Clueless. And again, Cassie Lang, she's now a teenager. Marvel keeps teasing Young Avengers. Are we going to get Stature in Ant-Man 3? Maybe. We then jump to the Avengers headquarters, and we see Black Widow basically playing the role of Nick Fury, and she's talking through a hologram, talking to Nebula and Rocket, she's talking to Okoye, she's talking to Rhodey, and she's talking to Captain Marvel. And Captain Marvel has her comic book haircut, and they're basically talking about the state of the universe. And I saw articles that said Okoye more or less hinted at Namor in the MCU, where she basically talked about an earthquake off the coast of Africa and they're not going to do anything about it. And I saw the movie twice and I'm just like, how is this hinting to Namor? It'd be one thing if she simply said, oh, there's an earthquake off the coast of Africa underwater and I know who's causing it, but I'm not touching it. That's not my business. As opposed to just saying there was an earthquake and we're not going to do anything about it because it's an earthquake. It's a natural disaster. What do you do about a natural disaster? It's not a need for the Avengers. Like, that's how I took it. Not the fact that, oh, just because it was underwater. Like, if anything, you would think the fact that half the universe got snapped away, which would include Atlantis, so you would think if they're gonna hint at Namor, there'd definitely be a bigger hint, considering I'm pretty sure his people got erased as well. Also, speaking of Wakanda, yeah, there's a dog barking in the background, can't really do anything about it, so just ignore that. But anyway, I was hoping, and I'm a little disappointed, that they didn't really go into the state of Wakanda in this movie. Like, T'Challa is gone, Shuri is gone. Who's ruling Wakanda right now? Is T'Challa's mother still alive? Is she ruling Wakanda? Did Okoye take the heart-shaped herb and now she's the Black Panther? Where's Nakia? They didn't really go into any of that in this movie. And again, I'm disappointed in that. And granted, I know there's a lot of stuff to get through in this movie. Maybe you don't have to show Wakanda, but at least have a line or something to say what's going on in Wakanda. Also, did they hint that Rhodey and Carol Danvers are kinda in a relationship or have some type of romantic involvement? Because right before she left to finish what she was doing around the universe, she kind of gave him the Nala eyes from Lion King and basically told him to be careful. And in the comics, they were dating. So I'm like, is that a hint to that? But eventually, after all that, and after Cap and Black Widow have a conversation about moving on, Scott Lang shows up on the front door. The moment that you see on the trailer, hey, let me in. This Ant-Man, you remember me? Can you buzz me in? So he has a conversation with Black Widow and Captain America, basically theorizing that he believes that time travel is possible, because this is where you get the reveal that he was trapped in the quantum realm for 5 hours, but in reality it was 5 years, and so time moves differently in the quantum realm, and so he believes that time travel is possible. And so, being that he's not really a scientist, he's more of an engineer. He fixes things, but he's not a scientist on that level. Not to say he's not smart, he is an engineer, but he doesn't know anything about quantum mechanics. He takes it to somebody who might know about quantum mechanics. One of the biggest brains in the MCU, Tony Stark. And so we jump to Tony Stark in his 5-year future, and we see that he lives in a cabin in the woods, and he has a daughter, Morgan Stark, which they did tease in Infinity War by saying that they were going to have a child, but he said son, and they were going to name him after her uncle, Morgan. So they at least kept the name. And kudos to Marvel with the casting of these little kids, because like that little girl that played Morgan Stark was adorable, just like the little girl that played Cassie Lang in Ant-Man 1 and 2, she was adorable. The kid in Ant-Man 3, he was adorable. The little girl that played Monica Rambeau in Captain Marvel, she was adorable. Like, they keep finding these adorable kids in these movies, so that's great. But Tony tells Widow, Cap, and Ant-Man that time travel is impossible, and really, he doesn't want to mess with the timeline because he got his second chance. Yes, the world is screwed up, but he got to move on with Pepper. He got to have a child, all the things he's ever wanted. And so why would he want to screw with that? And honestly, I don't blame him. And so he basically tells them, like, yeah, it sucks what happened, but y'all need to suck it up and move on, because I have. They then try to track down Bruce Banner to see if he could figure out the time travel thing, because he is the other big brain that they know in the MCU. And we realize that Bruce Banner and Hulk basically merged to form Professor Hulk. He took the brains of Bruce Banner and the brawn of Hulk and made it one. So the CGI for Professor Hulk looked great. Like, in the face, he looked way more Mark Ruffalo than he's ever looked before as the Hulk. Like, before in the Hulk transformations, like, you could see Mark Ruffalo in the face, but for the most part, he still looked like a monster to a certain extent. But this version, he just looked like a giant green Mark Ruffalo. He even had the stubble. And I was just like, oh, this is so cute. Look at Bruce Banner looking like Daddy Green Hulk. Hulk. And you had the kids coming, like they wanted to take pictures with the Hulk, and he actually did a dab Hulk out. Like, it was cute to see Mark Ruffalo like that. And he basically tells them, like, dealing with the quantum realm isn't really his wheelhouse, but he's willing to try. And so they show them experimenting with the quantum realm, and they end up sending Scott Lang into the past. But instead of sending him into the past, they end up turning him into a teenager. They end up turning him into an old man. They turn him into a baby. I guess it kind of worked in a sense, but not in the way they were hoping. They then jump back to Tony Stark. He's a hero after all, so of course he can't let things go. And the thing that really pushed him over the edge was coming across the picture of the person that he lost, Peter Parker, who is somebody that he looked at as a son and was the child he never had before he had Morgan. And so with Friday's help, he comes up with a model to try to see if he can figure out if the time travel thing can work. And he actually didn't even think it would work. And lo and behold, it did work. And it was cool to see him figure it out. But part of me was kind of like, I kind of wish that Shuri did not, because I didn't think she was going to die. So I'm like, now that I'm seeing this scene though, I'm like, how cool would it have been to have Tony Stark and Shuri, two characters that have never met and two of the smartest characters in the MCU, figure out time travel together? Because it was established by first Nate Moore, who was one of the producers on Captain America Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, and Black Panther. He was the first to come out and say Shuri is the smartest in the MCU. She's even smarter than Tony Stark. And that was co-signed by the Russo brothers as well. So unless Kevin Feige himself comes out and says that's not true, then yes, Shuri is the smartest in the MCU and she's smarter than Tony Stark. But how cool would it have actually been to have a moment where the two biggest brains are coming together to figure out time travel? And maybe you would see, instead of them telling us that Shuri is smarter than Tony Stark, because from everything that they're showing us with Tony figuring out time travel and all this other stuff, they're showing, yeah, Tony Stark is the smartest. Granted, Shuri's not around, so maybe if she was around, she could figure out time travel too, but at the end of the day, she didn't. It would have been a good bonding moment between Tony Stark and Shuri, you know, two geniuses just coming together for the greater good. And I thought Shuri would have been the one to rebuild Vision, to make him the white Vision like in the comics, and he would have eventually have shown up in the end. But no, none of that happened. Again, wrong. So yeah, Stark figures out time travel. He has this touching scene with his daughter, and then he heads to the Avengers mansion, and before Steve could even say anything, he already knows that Bruce Banner screwed up the time travel and told Steve that what Banner did was push time through Scott and not push Scott through time. I think he called it the EPR paradox. I don't know. We then eventually get an explanation of how time travel works in the MCU. It's not like Back to the Future, Time Cop, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Hot Tub Time Machine, Quantum Leap, and all the other movies that Rhodey and Ant-Man mentioned. Basically, the way time travel works in the MCU is kind of how it works in Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super. For those of you unfamiliar with Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super, basically there's a character named Trunks. He goes back in time to save one of the main characters, Goku, from dying of a heart attack and to save his world from being destroyed by these androids. But in going back to the past to save the life of Goku and to save that world from being destroyed by the androids, it doesn't affect his future. It basically creates an alternate timeline where his future is still the same, but the changes that he made in this past created a new timeline. They're now divergent from each other. And that's basically how time travel works in the MCU. Because Rhodey asked the question where it's like, well, why can't we just go back to the past and kill baby Thanos? And it's like, yeah, you can go back to the past and kill baby Thanos, but it's not going to change the future that we've come from. What it's going to do is create a new future or a new timeline where Thanos is dead, and that's just going to be the timeline of that future, but it's not going to affect us. And I mean, the way they explained it in the movie, I was confused, but eventually I got it, because again, Dragon Ball Z. But yeah, now that Stark is on board and they're ready to do the time travel thing, they got to reform the Avengers that's left. And Natasha goes on the hunt for Hawkeye, and you get introduced to this awesome scene of Hawkeye, who's now going by Ronin, going after these, I'm assuming they're Yakuza gang. And to me, this scene almost became a completely different movie. A movie that I would love to see, by the way, where Hawkeye was just slaughtering these people brutally. And after I got over how cool this scene was, part of me was just like, I wonder if there's going to be any ramifications for this scene, and that Hawkeye is dressed in this uniform inspired by the Japanese samurai, and he's a white guy, and he's going around killing Japanese people. I was like, granted, I didn't really have a problem with it in the movie, but I was like, yeah, I don't know. I think people might have a problem with this. Granted, he is killing bad guys, but still. But yeah, jumping forward, like, who would have thought Ant-Man would be so important to these movies going forward? Even to the point that the first Ant-Man movie was basically a heist movie, and now this movie, which they joked about, is a time heist movie. And of course, I knew from a long time ago, ever since those set photos leaked, back when they were still filming this movie, that this movie was going to have time travel, but I didn't know the circumstances of the time travel. I didn't know how they were going to time travel, and I didn't know why they were going to time travel. And so once we get to the time travel part of this movie went on a direction that I just wasn't expecting at all. And so once they go through time, it basically becomes a MCU, this is your life, and a who's who of the MCU, because they get everybody to come back. And this is why I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, if you have not seen the MCU movies up to this point, this movie is not for you, because you see Alexander Pierce and Agent Rumlow and the Hydra agents from Winter Soldier. You get to see moments from the first Avengers movie from a different perspective. You get to see the Ancient One, which was cool because you get to see that she did kind of participate in the Battle of New York, but ultimately the Sorcerer Supreme is about protecting the reality, not protecting the world. And plus, her having the Time Stone, I'm pretty sure she knew that the Avengers could take care of it, just like she knew that Stephen Strange was going to come 5 years from now. But it was still cool to see the Ancient One. You get to see a young Michael Douglas as Hank Pym. You get to see Agent Carter. And interestingly enough, this is the first time that the movies have taken a character that was established just for the TV universe in Jarvis from the Agent Carter TV show, which I'm still upset that show was canceled. I'm really hoping at some point Disney Plus decides to bring that show back. But they had Jarvis show up as a cameo in this movie when Tony met Howard Stark. And also on top of that, like, Thor the Dark World is basically people's least favorite Marvel movie, and kudos to the Russo brothers in taking Thor the Dark World and kind of making it important with the conversation that you have between Thor and his mother. Speaking of Thor, like, I completely forgot to mention what they did with Thor's character. Again, something that I was not expecting at all. And I mean, they kind of alluded to his mental state in Infinity War in the fact that Thor mentioned to Rocket that he's over 1,500 years old, and for the most part, he's never lost. But in these last couple of years, like, he's lost his mother, he's lost his father, he's lost his best friends in the Warriors 3, he's lost his other best friend in Heimdall, he's lost Loki, he's lost his home world, he's lost his hammer, and he's lost half of his people. So out of all of the Avengers, Thor is the one that's lost the most, and so that's got to take a toll on a person, even somebody that's a god. And so as a result, he basically reverted back to the drunken, hedonistic person that he was in Thor 1. The only difference is, at least in Thor 1, he was still fighting giant monsters and stuff like that, and so he was getting his cardio on, but in this, he's just drinking and partying and all this other stuff. And so Thor, he basically looks like Volstagg. But going back to Loki, this I think was their way of basically saying that, yeah, in the timeline that we know of, Loki's dead, but you saw when they went back to 2012 with the original Avengers that Loki stole the Tesseract and basically dipped. And so I don't know if the Tesseract allows you to travel through time, but it definitely allows you to travel through space. And so that broke the timeline of the original Avengers because that didn't happen before. So now you got Loki wandering around, which also means he's not locked in prison during Thor the Dark World, and so he doesn't experience that character growth that he goes through when his mother dies. But I'm also thinking this is going to be what the Loki Disney Plus series is going to be about. Him with the Space Stone traveling to different worlds, and maybe, again, I'm not sure if the Tesseract allows you to travel through time as well. But yeah, but this is their way of saying, hey, Loki's actually alive, even though he's really not, because again, different timeline. But yeah, like I mentioned before, like, yeah, this movie went in many different places that I wasn't expecting at all. And I mean, granted, there were some things that happened in this movie that I did predict. Some obvious, like how the movie started with the Hawkeye stuff, and some not so obvious. Like, a lot of people were jumping between, is it going to be Captain America or is it going to be Tony Stark that dies? Are they both going to live? Are they both going to die? And I pretty much knew that Tony Stark was going to be the one to die because I was like, well, this universe started with Iron Man, and being that this is the Endgame, it would only make sense if it ends with Iron Man. And on top of that, because I follow movie news so much, I knew that Ty Simpkins, the little boy from Iron Man 3, was going to be in this movie. So for those of you that were confused, that little boy that they showed during Tony Stark's funeral standing by himself, that was a grown-up Ty Simpkins, the little boy from Iron Man 3. And so knowing that he was going to come back, I'm like, what other reason would he come back save for the fact that Tony Stark dies in this movie? Like, that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Plus, I'm like, as much as Disney has been paying Robert Downey Jr. for these movies, I'm pretty sure they want him dead. Like, most of the budget for these movies have been going to Robert Downey Jr. But I will miss seeing Tony Stark, especially considering now the universe is opening up. Like, we won't ever get to see Tony Stark interact with Reed Richards. Like I mentioned with Shuri, we won't ever get to see Tony Stark interact with Shuri. We won't ever get to see Tony Stark match wits with Doctor Doom. We won't ever get to see Tony Stark and Namor, or Tony Stark and Beast, who's also pretty smart. Tony Stark and Professor Xavier. Basically, we won't get any more Tony Stark in these movies going forward, so that's gonna suck. But speaking of somebody else that won't be there, like, again, something I didn't predict, they killed Black Widow. Like, oh my god, like, I wasn't expecting that in the slightest, especially when they announced that she was getting her own solo movie. Like, I knew her movie was going to take place in the past, but I thought maybe she was going to tell, like, hey, let me tell you the story of my past, or whatever the case. She was going to narrate it to somebody else. And it's like, nope, again, wrong. And I will say, the first time I saw this movie, her death didn't hit me that hard, because I was just like, this doesn't feel real to me. Like, are they going to reverse this somehow by the end? I don't think this is real. But the second time I saw it, it did hit me, and I was like, fuck, she's actually gone. And how cool was that scene that Hawkeye, or rather Ronan, and Black Widow were fighting for each other for the right to basically commit suicide. That scene was so tense. Like, I didn't know who it was going to be. Like, is it going to be Hawkeye? Is it going to be Black Widow? Like, I don't want it to be either one of them. And when it ended up being Black Widow, I was just like, oh my God. Again, this is on my second view, and I was just like, why? But then I had to take a step back and be like, it was kind of convenient that the people that went to Vormir were Natasha and Clint Barton, two people that have an established relationship and two people that really care about each other and that love each other in a non-romantic way. But I was like, what would happen if the roles were reversed? We're talking about all these alternate timelines. And an alternate timeline, I'm pretty sure instead of Rhodey and Nebula staying on Morag to go after the Power Stone, Rhodey and Nebula went to Vormir to go after the Soul Stone. And so they're sitting on the planet as the Red Skull is talking to them. You have to lose something you love. And they're looking at each other with like, I guess this mission is a bust. And so eventually they all get back to the present with the stones intact. And another thing that's convenient that you just gotta let go is somehow Stark, with the help of Bruce Banner and Rocket, is able to make an Iron Man gauntlet that is powerful enough to house all 6 Infinity Stones. And I'm just like, that's interesting, because in Infinity War, Thanos had to go to this place called Nidavellir, which is a place of legend that most people, including Rocket, thought was a myth, where they build the universe's most dangerous and powerful weapons, and the fact that in order to build those weapons, they need to use the power of a star to make it. And so I'm just like, well, instead of Thanos going all this way to go to Nidavellir, he could have just went and got some Stark tech. And so anyway, the snap gets reversed by Bruce Banner, and everybody comes back, and what I believe is the greatest battle scene ever filmed in history. Like, this reminded me of the end of The Last Dragon, where Bruce Leroy is fighting, and then all of a sudden, all of his comrades from earlier come in to help him with the battle, and the tides turn. Or a more epic version of what happened in Ready Player One. And granted, Game of Thrones, The Battle of Winterfell hasn't aired yet, so who knows, after this episode airs, I might have to take back the title of the greatest battle sequence ever filmed, because Game of Thrones, Battle of Winterfell might take that cake. But as of right now, the greatest battle sequence ever filmed, especially for a comic book movie. Like, you saw everybody. But going back to Game of Thrones really quick, like, Endgame may be emotional, but I have a feeling this episode of Game of Thrones is gonna leave me wrecked. Like, I'm not ready. But anyway, I digress. The moment where Captain America wielded Mjolnir, the audience, like, everybody screamed. That was the moment in my non-spoiler review that I said this. And there was a moment in this movie that, if you saw this movie, you know what I'm talking about, that I had to look down at myself and go, oh my God, am I premature ejaculate? Oh my God, yes I am, because it was so epic and I got so excited. Clean up on row G, seat 6. Because yes, that moment was epic as hell. And it's really a callback to Age of Ultron, where Captain America tried to pick up the hammer and didn't. And according to Joss Whedon basically hinted that even back then Cap was worthy, but he didn't want to show up anybody because everybody else couldn't pick up the hammer. And Captain America, being as noble as he is, he chose to pretend that he couldn't pick it up, which is why when you get to this movie, he automatically knew that he'd be able to use the hammer. As the saying goes, desperate times calls for desperate measures. And like, yo, he ended up using that hammer way better than I've ever seen Thor use the hammer. And Thor's had hundreds of years with the hammer. Like, the way he was using the shield and the hammer, like, to make combos off each other, the way he rained lightning down on Thanos, like, he knocked Thanos out with like a Mortal Kombat uppercut. Like, I have not heard the audience have a bigger reaction prior to that moment. Like, I think the moment that got a bigger reaction than Captain America wielding Mjolnir is when he finally got to say, Avengers, assemble. But yeah, speaking of loud cheers, like, they really need to do something with Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel's character, in the future, because especially if she's gonna be the face of the MCU going forward, because at both screenings, like, my audience cheered because, and I know this is anecdotal, but at both screenings that I went to, my audience cheered at all the major moments that happened in this movie. When Thor summoned both Mjolnir and Stormbreaker, roaring applause. When Captain America got Mjolnir, roaring applause. When Falcon, Doctor Strange, Shuri, Black Panther, and especially Spider-Man showed up, roaring applause. When Pepper showed up in the rescue armor, roaring applause. When Wasp showed up, cheers. But when Captain Marvel showed up and took out Thanos' giant ship, crickets. Well, no. Actually, in my second showing, 2 people clapped. And I mean, even at the A-Force moment, which I loved, I'm so glad they had that because I do want an A-Force movie. But even at that moment, the audience cheered. But Captain Marvel by herself, like, I guess she's gonna end up replacing Hawkeye as everyone's least favorite Avenger. So the battle eventually ends with Tony Stark getting the gauntlet, but not before Wanda is able to put some hands on Thanos. Like, I love that moment, and it also goes to show how powerful Wanda is because she is the product of an Infinity Stone. And speaking of the product of an Infinity Stone, this movie more or less cemented how powerful Carol is because she also put some hands on Thanos to the point that Thanos needed the Power Stone to even be a challenge to her, where he didn't need any of the Infinity Stones to put some hands on Hulk. And that's the thing that annoys me regarding Hulk's character and what they do with him in these movies, because I was just like, yeah, the Professor Hulk thing was cool in the beginning, but I thought in this movie, during the second go round between Thanos and Hulk, that Hulk was going to go world breaker levels and really give it to Thanos. None of that happened. He didn't even have a second round with Thanos. And it's like, truth of the matter is, at least when it comes to the comic books, there is no one stronger than Hulk. Like, the saying is, Hulk is the strongest there is. Because, and it's like, sure, there are people that are more powerful than Hulk, like Scarlet Witch, like Doctor Strange, like Ghost Rider, like Odin, etc., etc., at least with regards to the comic books. But in terms of just pure physical strength, the madder Hulk gets, the stronger Hulk gets. So because of that, there's no limit to his strength. And they don't really show that in the movies. For whatever reason, they keep nerfing the Hulk. And so yeah, the role that Carol ended up playing when she gave it to Thanos, I thought that would at least been the Hulk, at least for a moment. But they didn't give it to him. But yeah, so anyway, Tony gets the gauntlet and he snaps away Thanos and all his forces. And that's basically the end of the battle. And granted, Tony is Iron Man, but because he is just a man, using the Infinity Gauntlet did kill him. And kudos to Tom Holland. Like, Tom Holland, like, really knows how to bring on the emotion. In Infinity War, everybody got emotional during the scene that he was like, Mr. Stark, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. But in this movie, like, I started tearing up when he looked at Tony Stark and he just got so emotional. He started crying like, Mr. Stark, we did it. Like, Tony, I'm so sorry. Like, we won, Tony. And I was just like, oh, fucking Tom Holland. But yeah, so after they have the funeral, they got to return the Infinity Stones back to the past timeline. So Captain America decides to go. And something that I didn't notice in the first viewing that I noticed in the second viewing, Bucky knew that Steve wasn't going to return. There's a moment right before Steve goes to the past that he's like, I'm going to miss you, buddy. And Steve says to him, like, what are you talking about? Like, it's going to be fine. Like, I'll be back. And he doesn't come back. And it's like, yeah, Bucky knows his friend. And speaking of Stucky, like, Captain America didn't really give a fuck that Bucky came back because they didn't, for the most part, aside from that one moment, they didn't really have a single conversation at all in this movie. But yes, it looks like Captain Falcon is now going to be a thing. So it kind of makes me wonder, the Falcon and Winter Soldier series that's coming to Disney Plus, I'm like, shouldn't it be called Captain Falcon and Winter Soldier? Maybe they just released a fake name because of spoilers or whatever, because I'm like, yeah, he's Captain Falcon now. So, but yes, Black Captain America, just like in the comics. Trump's not gonna like that. There's supposed to be a WandaVision show coming to the Disney Plus service, but Vision never came back in this movie, so how is that gonna work? Also, somebody that never came back, I thought, especially because of the Disney Fox deal, I thought they were gonna bring back Quicksilver, especially now that eventually at some point they're gonna introduce Magneto and the X-Men in this world. So I was like, okay, time travel and all that, they're gonna bring Quicksilver back. Nope. And I thought at some point there were set photos that leaked that had Aaron Taylor Johnson on set, but I guess either that was a fake or they just decided to cut him out the movie for whatever reason. I wanted to see Quicksilver come back, but again, wrong. But yeah, let's talk about Captain America's decision to stay in the past. I don't know if I like that, because yes, at the end of the day, Captain America deserves a break. Captain America deserves to have a life. Captain America deserves to have some happiness. But does he deserve to have a life and happiness at the expense of breaking the time timeline, because that's essentially what he did. He broke the timeline. And not only did he break the timeline, like, I get it's a movie and movies have different rules in real life, but all this talk about Peggy being the love of his life, and I'm just like, really? They've only known each other for what, a couple weeks? And they had one kiss in Captain America the First Avenger. And so I'm just like, you really broke the timeline for a woman that you actually don't really know that well. And on top of that, I could be wrong, but didn't Peggy Carter tell him in The Winter Soldier that she moved on with her life and she had a husband, she had kids, and she had grandkids? So basically, Steve Rogers just basically erased all of that, right? Also, what about him moving on with Sharon Carter, which I hated that, but still, it's canon, it's in the universe. What about that? Also, speaking of Sharon Carter, like, now how weird is it that because Steve went back to the past to marry Peggy, Sharon Carter is now his niece? So what kind of conversation is that going to be where it's like, hey Sharon, yeah, Uncle Steve, in another universe, you and I made out. Ew, Uncle Steve. It's like, okay. Also, in this new timeline that Steve Rogers created, does S.H.I.E.L.D. exist? Because Peggy Carter created S.H.I.E.L.D. based on the idea of Captain America and trying to live up to the standard that he set in giving his life for this country. So does that not count anymore now that he showed back up in her timeline? Also, now that he's back in the past, there's still technically a Steve Rogers that's buried in the ice in that timeline. So now that there's another Steve Rogers in the world, does that mean they never find the buried Steve Rogers? Or are there now two Steve Rogers walking around in that timeline? An old one and a young one? I have a lot of questions. Something else I have a lot of questions about. So at the end of this movie, you saw Tom Holland going back to high school and he runs into Genki. I know his name's not Genki, but for all intents and purposes, he's Genki. They just put a new name on him and Ned, but he's basically Miles Morales' best friend that they slapped a new name on and stole him from Miles Morales and gave it to Peter Parker. But anyway, again, that's neither here nor there. So we see Ned, Genki, we see him meeting Peter Parker at the high school, and I guess considering they're both at high school, it's safe to assume that Ned disappeared too. But I find it highly improbable, because we already saw the trailers for Spider-Man Far From Home, that Mary Jane, Flash Thompson, all the main characters and side characters that we saw in Spider-Man Far From Home happened to be dusted as well. The teachers too, like everybody within Spider-Man's life got dusted away too. Like, did Aunt May survive the snap? Did she age 5 years? Like, how does that work? Speaking of the snap and how does that work, now that Iron Man basically brought everybody back in the 5-year time gap, like now that people are returning to this world and 5 years time has passed, how awkward is that going to be if you, like, for example, you got the guy played by Joe Russo in the beginning of the movie talking about how he went on a date for the first time in 5 years. Prior to the snap, did he have a husband or boyfriend before that disappeared? Now his husband or boyfriend is back, but he already went on a date and established a connection with this new guy. So how does that work? Or taking it on the flip, if you got a husband or a wife that ended up having kids and got married to somebody else in that 5 years, that's going to be an awkward reunion. Or what about people that had jobs? Like, if you worked on Wall Street when you disappeared and now 5 years later, you're going to get your job back? There's going to be mass unemployment in this new world. Also, what about people that disappeared out of houses? Say my whole family disappeared and we don't live in this house, but then somebody else moves in this house, but hey, now I'm back. Do I get my house back or am I now homeless? And what about bank accounts? How do bank accounts work? Does your bank account still intact? You still have money in your bank account? Like, where's your savings, your 401k? How does this new world work? Like, I was under the assumption, like, for the most part, like, everything would kind of get reversed or people won't remember the snap. But no, people remember. Also, is the Hulk going to heal from the Infinity Gauntlet? Again, they keep nerfing the Hulk. The thing about the Hulk, aside from his incredible strength, is his healing factor is way more powerful than even Wolverine's. So I'm just like, considering it seems like it's been a couple days, I'm assuming it's been a couple days since the snap, I'm like, he should have healed by now. But yeah, so Thor is now part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and they make reference to the comic book, The Asgardians of the Galaxy, and he promotes Valkyrie to be the Queen of Asgard. I'm assuming Thor is going to be part of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and I'm pretty sure the main reason for him to be there is to face off against Adam Warlock, because who else is strong enough in the Guardians to take on Adam Warlock? It's definitely not Drax. And the main plot for Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is basically going to be like finding Nemo, finding Gamora. You saw that Quill was looking at a picture of Gamora and it said searching. So I'm assuming that after she joined the battle against Thanos, she dipped off in this new timeline. But yeah, so Avengers 5, it has to be Kang the Conqueror, right? Because the Avengers broke the timeline. Like, Thanos from the past is now in the future and he's dead. So now the Avengers of the past won't go through Infinity War because Thanos is gone. You got Gamora. She's never going to join the Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014. She's now in 2023. Loki is wandering the cosmos with the Tesseract in 2012, which didn't happen. You got Captain America, who went back to the 40s to marry Peggy and possibly have children. And who else knows what he's done in that past time as well? Did he still fight crime? Did he help eliminate Hydra earlier than it was eliminated and Captain America Winter Soldier? Did he help start up other organizations? Like, what else did he do in that time when he went back to the past? Again, the Avengers broke time. But yeah, despite many of the plot holes, I did ultimately enjoy this movie. I think I enjoyed it more the second go round than the first go round. Like, there was some moments that I teared up and felt a welling of emotion, but I don't think anything hit me as hard as like when Captain America first showed up to help Wanda and Vision in Infinity War, or when Thor shows up in the Battle of Wakanda and says, "Bring me Thanos!" Or during the scene where they're trying to figure out how to save Vision and Captain America is like, "I might know someone," and you hear the Wakanda music playing. Like again, there were moments that got me hyped, like Captain America having Mjolnir and A-Force and all that, but I don't think it hit me as hard. At least the first time I saw this movie, nothing hit me as hard as it did the first time I saw Infinity War. But yeah, but like I said, I definitely enjoyed this movie way more the second time than I did the first time. But I would still ultimately say this movie made me super moist. But if you don't know what that means, check the description box below. I give a detailed synopsis of what my rating system means. Super moist is higher than a regular moist, but not as high as a United States of Smash. But yeah, I'm definitely curious of where the MCU goes from here. But yeah, what did you think of Avengers Endgame? Which one did you like more? Did you like Infinity War or did you like Endgame more? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, be sure to check out my social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links for those will be in the description box below. And while you're at it, check out my other videos on my channel. And please be sure to give the thumbs up for this video. It'll really help out the channel. And if you like what you see from the other videos, please subscribe for more. And as always, I'll catch you guys next time. I love you 3000.